Welcome to episode number 4 of the Church Leadership Podcast here on YouTube. In this episode, Andy and I sit down with Chris Crain, who's the Executive Director of the Birmingham Metro Baptist Association. It's a great conversation. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast, your weekly source for encouraging and equipping local church leaders, with your hosts, Mark Gainey and Andy Frazier. In each episode, Andy and Mark sit down with church leaders that you should know. We believe these honest conversations will be helpful and encouraging to you as you lead the local church. Here is this week's episode.
Welcome to episode number 4.
On today's episode, we have with us a special guest, Chris Crain from the Birmingham Metro Baptist Association in Birmingham, Alabama. And Chris has been serving in that position since January 2nd of 2019. So your long tenure here has brought you to the table with us today, Chris. So glad to have you. Thank you for being with us.
It's an honor to be with you guys. I finally found where the water fountain is, so that new.
That's right.
But good to sit down and talk with you.
Well, we're glad you're here for lots of reasons. One, because we're looking forward to hanging out with you, but I also think our conversation is going to really be a help to a lot of church leaders listening to this episode. So we're pumped. We're glad you're here.
Chris, we are always interested in hearing stories of people in our network of friends, and even especially in the state here in Alabama, of leaders who have a story to tell, some things that we feel like those listening will be encouraged and equipped, challenged, a better leader in the church, just simply because of things we get to talk about. So one of the ways we do that is just to let you share your story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yes, I'm an atypical leader. I grew up the son of an alcoholic. And so I learned to put my emotions in a box, so I was a very introverted child. And by the time I was a teenager, that got kind of painful, guys, when I was interested in girls. Yeah. So there was this one redheaded girl I wanted to meet, and so we were lined up in formation in the band, and I just didn't have the guts to go up and speak to her. But thankfully, she stood there long enough. She had stood in such a way that she'd locked back her knees, and she fell and passed out in my arms. Wow. And so it was like God was saying from heaven, this guy's such a fool, I'm going to have to throw a girl in his arms. And so we've been together ever since.
Wow.
And God called me to ministry when I was 17. And the first 3 years I stood at the pulpit, I literally had a death grip, because I was so afraid. And so if you're a reluctant leader or you're an introvert, I want to tell you, God can use you, and it's just an honor to be sitting here now. I'm in a different church every week. I have to stand before a different audience just about every other day in some meeting or someplace. And so God is bigger than your past, and God can truly use anybody, and I believe that. So God led me down a path of pastoring established churches, and we also planted 3 churches, and eventually ended up sensing a call to do denominational work specifically, but really coaching pastors and helping to enrich the lives of churches and ministries. And so that led me to be a director of missions, and now I'm here as executive director in the Birmingham Metro Baptist Association. So it's just great to see God's hand of providence on my life.
Amen.
That's awesome.
Amen.
Well, I'm going to pick up on that for a minute, because something you mentioned is huge. Because coming in contact with lots of different personalities and different kinds of pastors over the years, I have encountered pastors who think, my personality is a little bit introverted. I'm not that out front guy, and I feel like sometimes they're reluctant to lead, or just reluctant to believe God can use them. So I guess, how did you overcome that? And what are some ways that you would tell those kinds of personalities and leaders that they can overcome that perceived obstacle?
Absolutely. I think the key for me was finding the right mentors in my life that would speak words of encouragement, and also developing a philosophy of ministry. There are 5 questions I ask myself every day, and it's the word point. I spell it out, and each letter has significance. So P, I'm always asking, who can I partner with? Because I don't need to sit in my office and be by myself. I need to be out there engaging with other people. O is how am I owning the Great Commission? Because I believe in making disciples. I believe in evangelism and doing what God called us to do. I always ask, how am I investing in my life? Because if I'm not pouring things in, I don't have anything to give out. And then in, who am I nurturing? Because every Paul needs a Timothy. Every Timothy needs a Paul. And so we need to be engaging in that intentionally. And T, am I being teachable? Because I think the greatest downfall that I see in the lives of leadership is they stop being teachable. Maybe success is their greatest enemy. So I try to keep my life on point. I try to surround myself with people who can encourage me.
Dude, that is awesome. In fact, I saw you post that on social media, I think, the other day. So I'm just going to go and tell you, confess, I'm swiping that, man. I'm using
for it.
That is awesome.
I know this. An average Christian person or an average leader would be surprised to know how many leaders there are who by nature are introverted.
Absolutely.
Or even those who may seem confident are probably on the inside very unsure and uncertain. Yeah. And if it weren't for the Holy Spirit, I know a lot of guys who would not be who they are or doing what they're doing without His empowering work and the confidence they have in Jesus rather than themselves. So that's very encouraging to hear. Not everybody who's called to ministry is some loud, boisterous,
that's right.
Adrian
Rogers voice.
Oh, I wish.
So,
but Andy, I thought about what you said. Not every leader is that extrovert, and it's so true. I have to turn it on. So, and I don't think that's an ungodly thing. It's just I have to make an intentional, conscious thought. Okay, I've got to be on right now. But I'll be honest with you, after I preach a sermon or I'm in a meeting, and sometimes it's a meeting of 4 to 8 people or whatever, that's more intimidating to me than being up in front of 500 or 1,000.
Yeah, right.
And when I do that, after that, it's like I have dug a ditch for 3 hours.
Drained.
And so that post-adrenaline stress or depression that you sometimes feel, that is so real.
Yeah, being a leader, there's a lot of emotional involvement in that.
Yes.
And for some it's more of their personality and their experiences and it's probably easier for them. The temptation there is to be more self-reliant than spirit-led.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I'm with you. I'm introverted too. We who are introverts, we have our own proclivities and our own ways that we default back to. So that's good. So what's going on in your life right now that's exciting other than this change of settings?
Well, there's not much else going on, to be honest with you. Chasing around 3 kids, that's huge. But things are going well here, adjusting to the new life here in the Birmingham Metro Baptist Association. Some people have kidded with me about me coming in and changing the name right out of the gate. But we were formerly known as the Birmingham Baptist Association, and I would always get questions about, what areas do you cover?
Right.
So I wanted to make sure that people out in Hoover, people in Vestavia, people across over to the west side in Forestdale, all the areas surrounding here, we're enfranchised and that we had a vision and that we're moving forward. Actually, our new logo, we have 3 forward arrows because we want to show people that we're moving ahead in 3 different directions together, and that's to encourage, equip, and engage our churches in the Great Commission. So that's what's going on for me, is trying to get off the ground, doing that 90-day to 100-day run that you do as a new leader. So I have to meet 126 pastors, plus all the city officials and everything that goes into being a Metropolitan Baptist Association. So that's my life.
Let me ask you about that a little bit too, because I want to dig deeper in that for a second. Because, I imagine a lot of the leaders and pastors listening to this episode, they may not be in the middle of a name change, but they may have thought about it, because I think words matter. And maybe they're serving at, New Macedonia East number 3 or something,
Right.
You crazy names of churches we have sometimes. And they're thinking about, well, maybe we need to, change our identity in terms of name to better really communicate who we are, or who we're trying to target, or who we're trying to reach, or where we are. So talk a little bit about that, because, a lot of people say, hey, you come to an organization, you don't change anything for the first 6 months or a year or whatever, but you took a different a different approach, which I think has been incredible, and I think God is blessing it. But talk a little bit about that process and how you went about changing the name and what you were thinking in terms of rebranding.
Well, before I came here, and I was talking with the search team as they were interviewing me and just talking about some of the ideas that I would bring to the table, it came up that our community around Birmingham held many of our churches, and somehow they felt alienated. So we needed to, even in our name, enfranchise as many people as possible so that we could get the most buy-in. And I think in a church setting, and we've experienced this as we looked at naming church plants, somebody has got to be the voice at the table among your leadership for those who aren't there yet. So I encourage that. I don't think you need gimmicks. I don't think you need to be inauthentic to who you are. But I do think you need to think strongly about what can you do? How can I put on that missionary hat and think about the people that we're trying to reach? And it comes down to even your name.
Absolutely. And that, I think sometimes as leaders we forget that's hard for others to do. You know, we naturally think about right now who we are, you know, who we've been, and I think it's a struggle sometimes for us to say, okay, well, let's think about where we need to be. So that's good, man. That's awesome. Well, let me ask you this question. You know, again, we encounter lots of different church leaders and pastors, and what Andy and I do, and I know you do. I mean, you've been in ministry for years. You were at another association. Now you're here at the Birmingham Metro Baptist Association. So you encounter a lot of pastors and church leaders. What are some of the challenges that you have found pastors face? Some of those struggles, some of those pain points or issues that are obstacles sometimes that you kind of common to the leaders you encounter, and how do you encourage them to overcome those?
I believe that a lot of the challenges our pastors face are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You're going to find them in just about any church, because 75% of churches in my particular denomination are plateaued or declining. So it is a very real, very relevant issue.
Absolutely.
And I think the pastors, they're going to encounter several of these things. They're going to see a lack of urgency in their congregation. People just get in a place where they're calm and at peace with who they are, and that's not a healthy place to be. Or they have urgency about the wrong things. Maybe it's about their polity. They're urgent about keeping things the way they are, the status quo, or honoring the past too much. And you can't continue moving forward if you're always looking in the rearview mirror. Or you see that most don't understand the need for addressing the changing culture around the church, or no new leaders. That is a huge issue, because everything rises and falls on leadership. And what I said a moment ago, there's no voice at the table for those who aren't there yet. But I think one of the biggest challenges our leaders face, our pastors in particular, is that as they address all these things that I just mentioned, that they themselves stop being healthy. Back in 2012, I had been in a particular church I was serving for 10 years, and I hit a wall. I'll just be frank with you guys. I think we're in a safe place here. I hit a wall, and I needed a sabbatical. I needed to get away for a while and just focus on my relationship with Jesus Christ. And when I got out of that situation, I made 5 commitments to things that I do every day. These 5 commitments are: I read the Bible every day for me in my walk with Christ. I pray. I set aside time to do that. I talk to a friend about something that matters. It's so easy to get disconnected from each other.
Absolutely.
Here's something kind of crazy, but this is who I am. I make a point to either listen to or play music. I'm a musician. I love that. Just engaging in the creative arts just frees my mind. My guitar is my best therapist. And then the 5th thing I do every day is something I absolutely hate, because I'm not a jock. I exercise every day. I put aside 20 to 30 minutes, and I do physical exercise, because I got to the point I was so stinking tired, I could not do what God called me to do in my church. And I was so anemic and weak.
Yeah.
And so I needed to exercise my body, and that's really helped my brain and my soul. So I think those are some of the issues our pastors are facing. And I'm with you guys. I've been there. I am there. I'm in the struggle.
Well, a couple of things that we know that you're passionate about being in not only this position, but where God has brought you in your history so far. Your tendency has been to help the church, not just pastor a flock. And a few of those things that you've been involved in are church planting and church revitalization. And a lot of the leaders that we get to talk to, and Mark and I are very honed in on making sure our churches are disciple-making churches. And we believe church planting and church revitalization, you can't do either of those without properly fulfilling the Great Commission by making disciples. Right. We know it's more than just making converts. So share with us just a minute or two, maybe something that might be helpful or encouraging to some guys out there who might be considering maybe church planting or the work of church revitalization.
Well, here's the tendency that we see in church, and this goes back to an evangelist who lived a long time ago, Vance Havner. He said that a church often begins as a vision of a man, and he sees a need in a community, and people join in that, and it becomes a movement. Eventually, as it goes forward and people see success, that success becomes their biggest downfall, and they develop this machine to keep the movement going. But what ends up happening ultimately is it becomes a monument. And many of our pastors have been called to a church that just frankly is a monument to the past. And so if I could give any word of advice or something that God showed me in that reality, is to think about the 3 R's. To respect an aging congregation. I mean, that's a biblical construct, to respect your elders and those who are wise. And so when I went into a church that needed revitalizing, I tried to develop those relationships and let them know that I was there for every generation, to respect them. But the second R is to reach the next generation. Unless we do that and hand that baton down well, then we're going to be held accountable before a holy God, for not passing the gospel baton and making disciples. And then the third R is to respond to your community as it changes. The ever so slight changes in your community, be aware. I'm not talking about changing your theology, your doctrine, or your stance, but I'm talking about your approach. You have to put on the mindset of a missionary and respond to those changes and you ought to know your community better than anyone. Mm-hmm. So if you could just keep in mind those 3 R's, I think that will put you in the frame of mind to begin the process of looking at how to revitalize your church.
And in thinking through those very well articulated points that people listening, I'll just go ahead and tell you, like Mark and I are going to swipe some stuff from Chris. You're welcome to do that today. I think he's going to give you liberty to.
I'm tweeting half of this out, man.
To do that. What would you say in going through some of the experiences you've had in ministry, in the established traditional church, and planting churches, and in revitalizing, and now in the associational work? What would you say maybe something that has happened in your life that God has taught you that was maybe a watershed moment, or maybe a moment where you can look back and say, all right, that's something that affects me even now?
I'll never forget when I was pastoring and I was in my 20s, and I called the church together to form a team to begin to look at revitalizing the church. So we put together 21 key leaders. Some of them had positions officially. Others were just those that others would listen to. And we met every Sunday night, and we started praying for our church and praying for our future. And I called the North American Mission Board, and I said, I don't know what to do with my church. I don't know if God is calling us to do a new work or try to fix what we've got. And they transferred me about 4 times. And finally, they got me to a guy named George Thomason, who is a great executive pastor in the state of Florida now. And George taught me a lot about how to work through the process of revitalizing and refocusing your church. But all that he taught us, out of all of it, the most important thing he taught me was to rely on the Holy Spirit. So one night we were gathered together in that prayer meeting, and we were talking about serious stuff, about our future, about huge changes. And this elderly man by the name of Gene walked out of the room, and he had to go to the restroom. He always had to have restroom breaks. And he came back in, and he opened the door, and he walked in. He had this strange look on his face, and he said, "There's something different in this room." And it was at that moment God began to lay out a plan through our people for our church. So that was really a watershed moment for me, is when God really intervened, and he began to do a great work, and it all centered around an elderly man going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So
Best moments are in the restroom, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I would just say to the pastors, look for those God moments and spend time in prayer and rely on the Holy Spirit. That's what George taught me.
And never underestimate the power of a restroom break.
That's right.
Never so.
You never know.
Yeah.
It could change the trajectory of a life in ministry. That's awesome. That is awesome. Okay, so you mentioned music earlier, and I got to ask this. We can't end this interview without asking this. So music is a big part of who you are, and a big part of really your background. So I think we may just need to ask this question of everybody we talk to. But what's on your favorites on your playlist? What are you listening to right now?
I play guitar. I play electric, so I'm really trying to get more skilled in my slide guitar. So right now I'm in constant repeat of Allman Brothers stuff.
Oh wow!
And so that, I guess that reveals my Southern roots a little bit. But I'm really trying to learn from Dwayne Allman how to make that slide talk.
Oh
so
wow!
There you go.
You can do that. Let me tell you.
That's
awesome. You'll have an audience for sure.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you giving us a peek into your world today, giving us some wonderful insight as a leader in the church, and we feel like because of just this conversation, and also, let me just go ahead and say this, we'll probably have another conversation with Chris on down the road.
Definitely going to.
So we need some more alliterated points, and but you might need another sermon or two listening to this that you can glean from our time. But we appreciate you so much being with us today and sharing your heart, sharing your story, and what God is doing with you. We know He's got great things in store for you and your family, and for the Birmingham Metro Baptist Association, not just the Birmingham Baptist Association. It is now the Birmingham Metro Baptist.
And as one of the pastors in the association, my church is in the association, I am excited, man.
Thank you, Mark.
To be able to partner with you, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Mark and Andy.
Well, look, I know you enjoyed this episode, and we just hope that you were encouraged and equipped to better lead where you are in your context in the local church. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Church Leadership Podcast. We hope you'll join us again next week.